The champagne slipped from my hand. Not because I was drunk, but because I'd just heard my daughter-in-law say, clear as a bell between the laughter and the string music, "Move him to the back row. He looks poor." The words cut through the air like a shard of glass. No one turned around. No one even blinked. They just kept laughing, raising glasses, posing for pictures, as if cruelty had become another part of the ceremony. I'm Calvin Mercer, 67 years old, a retired sound engineer. 40 years making sure other people's weddings sounded perfect. Never imagined I'd one day be the background noise in my own son's. I've been a widower for 6 years now. My wife Maggie used to say, a good song always knows when to fall silent. I believed that. Until today. Because this silence didn't have rhythm. It had shame. The wedding was held at Magnolia House, Savannah's crown jewel, a place for people who like their love stories told in gold leaf and white linen. The air smelled of champagne and magnolias, the kind of beauty that makes you forget what real grace looks like. And me, the man who taught his son how to strike the first piano key, was seated next to the speakers beside the sound crew. The irony wasn't lost on me. A young usher, barely 20, gave me an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer. The seating chart's already finalized." I nodded polite. "That's fine, son. You go on." Those words. It's fine I'd said them so often they no longer meant anything. The last time was at Maggie's funeral, when someone placed the wrong photo on the altar, and I just smiled and said, "It's fine." Because what else could I do now? Under the organ's hum, I realized what that smile had become a habit of survival, a way to vanish without leaving the room. Claire. The bride was beautiful in the sharp, deliberate way of people who know they're being watched. She smiled like light on glass, bright, but never warm. She whispered softly enough so microphones wouldn't catch the venom, and carried herself like someone allergic to imperfection. My son Evan stood up front, radiant in his gray suit. I wondered if he'd heard her words. If he had, he'd chosen silence like always. A wedding planner, all clipboard and pearls, approached me carefully. "Mr. Mercer, we'll need this seat for some of the extra audio gear. Could you move to the far side?" The far side, no flowers, no spotlights. Just a line of servers slipping in and out with trays of champagne. I stood the floor, creaking under my shoes. No one looked up. Not even my son. "Ladies and gentlemen," the officiant's voice rang out, "please take your seats. The ceremony is about to begin." I sat down again, clutching the small silver gift box in my lap, a photo frame Maggie had picked years ago for this very day. Her handwriting still faintly visible on the tag, "For Evan when he finds his forever." The lights dimmed and the string quartet began their piece. When Claire entered, every head turned. The train of her dress swept down the aisle like a wave of white silk. Cameras clicked like a swarm of locusts, and someone in the front whispered, "Perfect." Nothing to ruin the picture. I looked at my hands, veined, cracked, rough from decades of cables, wood, and soundboards. These hands built everything this day stood on. They paid for the food, the flowers, the music after I sold the old sailboat Maggie loved before she died. But no one here knew. And even if they did, no one would care. The violins soared, and I realized something was missing from their music respect. I started to rise, ready to walk out, when a quiet, firm voice came from beside me. "Stay seated. Don't let them see you walk away." I turned. A man in a navy suit sat there, silver-haired, calm as still water. He didn't look at me when he spoke again. "Let's pretend I'm sitting with you." I nodded, confused, but something in his tone made me listen. He lifted his champagne glass, eyes fixed straight ahead. Whispers rippled through the crowd. That's Adrian Harlow, the new owner of the hotel. Just like that, the air shifted. Cameras turned. Even the sound techs grew nervous, adjusting dials that didn't need adjusting. And suddenly I wasn't invisible anymore, because the man beside me carried gravity like a second skin. I studied him, trying to read his silence. He smiled faintly. "Don't worry, Mr. Mercer. They'll remember this day, but not for the bride." Before I could ask what he meant, the officiant Reverend Whitmore cleared his throat. His voice filled the hall, steady, resonant, almost sacred. "Before we begin, let us take a moment to honor the woman who planted kindness and music in the heart of our groom, Mrs. Margaret Mercer." The name struck like thunder. The room froze. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. Claire's smile faltered. Her mother, Evelyn Monroe, turned toward the planner, eyes flashing like a storm about to break. "What is this?" Who approved that Reverend Whitmore didn't flinch. The name was included in the ceremony notes, signed by both the bride and the groom. He held up the page. Evan's signature at the bottom, a small line of truth hiding in plain sight. Gasps spread through the crowd. Evan lowered his head, shame flickering across his face. Adrian leaned toward me, voice low. "That name just ripped off their mask." I whispered, "What did you do?" He smiled, calm. "Me. I only turned the mic on at the right moment." It hit me then he'd adjusted the sound system. The hotel was his. He wanted them to hear her name loud and clear. Claire's eyes darted around in panic. Evelyn's jaw clenched. And for the first time that day, I saw fear in the faces that had only known control. Reverend Whitmore finished softly. "May kindness never be forgotten, even among those who mistake ceremony for love." A glass shattered somewhere in the back, a tray dropped by a nervous hand, and the room fell into a silence so deep you could hear every heartbeat trying to find its rhythm again. Evan looked back at me, and in his eyes I saw something like regret or awakening. I only nodded. No words needed. Adrian set his glass down gently. "Now they know who Maggie Mercer was." I looked at him. "You did this for me, for her, both," he said, "but mostly for them to remind them how to pronounce the word respect." Guests began to rise awkwardly, pretending nothing had happened. Some whispered. Some avoided my gaze. But a few, just a few, looked at me with something close to shame. And as I sat there, I realized this wasn't revenge. It was restoration. When the ceremony finally ended, the applause was hesitant, hollow. But through it, I heard something faint, a melody that had been missing for years. The sound of silence. Not the kind that hides pain, but the kind that makes people listen. I stayed seated long after the name Margaret Mercer faded through the speakers. The whole room seemed to forget how to breathe. A few people coughed. Glasses met tables with the sharp ring of glass against metal. Somewhere in the back, a waiter froze mid-step. Reverend Whitmore's voice carried on, steady, deliberate, cutting clean through the hush, and in that same spirit of kindness, may Evan and Claire learn to honor what made them who they are. It sounded gentle, almost tender, but to anyone listening close, it landed like a warning. Claire's smile tightened. Evan stared at the floor, his hand trembling inside his sleeve. I knew that look, the moment a man realizes he's lost something he'll never get back. Applause broke out thin and scattered, more habit than celebration. A performance of joy with no conviction behind it. I rose slowly, meaning to leave before anyone could see the shame in my son's eyes. Then a hand rested on my shoulder. Firm, cool, not rough, but unshakably steady. A voice beside me, low and calm. "Don't go. They need to see you stay." I turned. It was Adrian Harlow. The man's face was composed, the expression of someone who had seen the world from the top and the bottom, and remembered both. Light from the chandeliers caught the silver in his hair, like steel burnished by time. "You knew my wife?" I asked, my voice rough. He tilted his head slightly. "I knew her well enough to recognize the man she trusted." Hearing Maggie's name from his mouth stopped me cold. This wasn't coincidence. "You're not here just for the wedding, are you, no?" he said simply. "I'm here because of a promise." The word hung between us, quiet as a heartbeat. He looked toward the stage where Claire was now posing for photos, the perfect bride, her beauty suddenly fragile like glass that knows it's about to crack. "I promised Maggie," he said softly, "that if you ever forgot who you were, I'd remind you." I didn't know whether to trust him. Adrian Harlow. The man who could change the tone of an entire ballroom by sitting down was speaking about my wife with gratitude, not pity, and not a trace of performance in his voice. When the music shifted to a slow jazz tune for the dinner hour, he gestured toward the garden doors. We stepped out together, leaving the noise behind. The evening light spread across the lawn like spilled honey. Wind moved through the magnolia trees, carrying the scent of flowers and river salt. Somewhere a saxophone played faintly from the terrace. Adrian reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope yellowed at the edges, the paper soft from time. On it, in a handwriting I would know anywhere for Adrian, "If you still keep the rhythm of kindness." I took it carefully. My fingers trembled. "What did she write?" I asked. He smiled, not the polite kind, but something small and real. "Read it. But there's one line she wanted me to tell you myself." He met my eyes. "Maggie said, Calvin doesn't need saving. He just needs someone to remind him he once made music matter." The words hollowed me out. I sat down on a wooden bench by the water's edge. Lanterns flickered above the lake, their reflections trembling like constellations that had fallen to earth. I unfolded the letter. The ink had bled, the paper smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. She wrote about her unfinished dream, a scholarship for kids who couldn't afford lessons for the children who only knew silence but hungered for melody. And at the end, her handwriting wavered, but her message struck clear as any chord. "If you can listen to this song without pain, it means you're ready to live again." I closed the letter, feeling the weight of her words settle like dust on the river breeze. Adrian spoke quietly. "I bought the Monroe Hotel chain last month. When I saw this wedding was scheduled here, I knew the past was coming to collect its promise." I looked at him. "You bought the entire chain?" For a promise, he nodded, calm as stone. "Because sometimes justice doesn't come from the courts, Calvin. It comes from people who still remember what decency sounds like." I turned my eyes back to the water. The ripples tapped the shore like the pulse of a song still unfinished. "Why tell me all this now?" He took a long breath, watching the lanterns sway. "Because they need to see. No one can erase you, not while someone still has the courage to sit beside you." Simple words, but they struck deeper than any sermon. I didn't cry. I just looked up at the glass-clear sky, and for the first time in years felt peace instead of emptiness. When we returned to the hall, the guests were already thinning out. Claire stood with her mother, Evelyn Monroe, their faces drawn tight as violin strings. They glanced my way, then turned sharply aside. Adrian leaned toward me, murmuring, "Don't look at them. People fear what they can't understand." A waiter passed by, placing 2 cups of coffee where the champagne had been. We sat near the window, watching the Savannah River shimmer in the fading light. Adrian spoke again, voice slow, measured. I'm going to finish what Maggie started. The scholarship, the foundation, all of it. But I don't want to do it alone. I need you. I let out a quiet laugh. An old man like me. What could I possibly give you? He rested his hand on the table. Remind me that kindness, too, can be a form of revenge. I smiled the kind of smile Maggie once called sad, but proud. Adrian reached into his wallet and pulled out a photograph, Maggie in a white dress standing by her piano, smiling at someone outside the frame. She sent this with the letter, he said. I touched the corner of the picture, the paper warm from his hand, and felt something heavy melt inside me. She always thought of others, I said, even the ones who hurt her. He nodded. And tonight they'll learn what that means the hard way. Somewhere inside, a microphone clicked that tiny electric crackle just before a sound system wakes. I recognized the tone instantly, the prelude to a revelation. I closed my eyes. I didn't know what Adrian was planning, only that the wedding wasn't over. And from the moment he sat beside me, this story was no longer mine alone. The air inside the ballroom was heavy like a thin veil of smoke that clung to every glass of champagne. The ceremony had ended, but no one seemed to know whether to clap or to leave. Congratulations came out awkward, brittle. Smiles froze mid-air, polite but lifeless, as if everyone sensed they had just witnessed something they didn't yet understand, something that would haunt them long after the flowers wilted. Claire stood motionless by the altar, her lips trembling. Evelyn Monroe. The woman who prided herself on control looked suddenly weightless like a marionette whose strings had been cut. She forced a smile at a cluster of guests, but no one smiled back. The name Margaret Mercer still lingered in the room like a cracked bell tone splitting their perfect facade right down the middle. I sat quietly in the back row watching. Evan stared at the floor, his hand tightening inside his pocket, fighting to hold himself together. He knew. He knew his mother's name had just been spoken aloud, and that justice, whatever it meant, had just started moving again. Beside me, Adrian Harlow leaned closer. His voice was almost a whisper. You see it, Calvin? One real name can expose 100 false ones. I nodded. And when the silence lands in the right place, it echoes louder than any speech. The reception limped forward like a play whose actors had forgotten their lines. A jazz trio played, but the rhythm faltered, a note too sharp a beat, half a second late. Some guests slipped out early, murmuring about urgent business. The rest stayed out of habit, not joy. From my seat, I saw Evelyn bend toward Claire, her voice low, but her tone slicing like a knife. Tomorrow we meet with the lawyers. That video cannot leave this room. Claire's reply was barely audible, the tremor in her voice sharper than fear. Mother. The room was full of phones. You can't stop what's already out. Across the hall, Adrian sipped his coffee instead of champagne. People like her, he said quietly, they don't fear humiliation. They fear being seen. I turned to him. What did you do with the sound system? A faint smile crossed his face. Not much. Just muted the mic when they tried to delete the tribute, and turned it back on when truth needed a stage. A simple act, but for people who lived and breathed by image, it was the cleanest cut imaginable, a wound right through reputation. 2 days later, the video spread across the internet like wildfire. A waiter had filmed the entire thing, Evelyn's outburst, Claire's frozen stare, and me sitting silently in the last row. They titled it, The Mercer Wedding Silence. The top comment read, That man's silence is louder than every excuse in this room. It gathered thousands of likes overnight. The story blew through Savannah first, then the state, then the country. From whispered gossip among the city's elite to a national headline, "The Father Who Didn't Flinch." Every outlet ran it: CNN, local radio, online tabloids. Suddenly, I wasn't just a man humiliated at his son's wedding. I was a symbol. I didn't want to be one. But symbols are never asked for. They're chosen by noise, by timing, by need. And while I stayed silent, America decided to listen. Monroe Group Evelyn's empire of hotels and real estate charm began to tremble. Business partners delayed contracts. Conferences were rescheduled. Stock prices slipped a few points, small enough for analysts to dismiss, large enough for investors to smell blood. No one said the words out loud, but everyone knew the reason: reputation. In Charleston, inside Monroe Hotel's glass headquarters, a crisis meeting erupted. Evelyn slammed her phone onto the table. "You let this happen. One name, and 30 years of image collapses." Claire's voice shook. "Do you think I wanted this? How was I supposed to know he was friends with Adrian Harlow?" The room fell silent. Evelyn froze mid-gesture. "Harlow." The color drained from her face. At that exact moment, a PR director entered, hesitant. "Mrs. Monroe, Mr. Harlow has ordered a full audit of all contracts between your company and the Magnolia House properties." Evelyn straightened. "Why?" "He said he wants to ensure transparency in management." The words landed like a verdict. Evelyn sank back into her chair, the illusion of power flickering out behind her eyes. That was the moment fear began to bloom. She called everyone she could: lawyers, investors, journalists, but for the first time in her life, no one answered. Claire stood by the window watching her mother spin through panic, and finally seemed to understand money can buy almost everything except respect once it's gone. I meanwhile went home, back to the quiet house by the Savannah River. No television, no social media, just the sound of water tapping the shore and the distant lights from passing boats. I didn't want fame. I wanted stillness. But silence, once loosed, has a way of traveling faster than speech. 3 days later, a small parcel arrived at my door. Inside was a folded newspaper, the headline circled in red ink: "Calvin Mercer, the man who reminded America that dignity still exists." Tucked behind it was a note handwritten on lined paper: "Thank you. Because of you, I called my father after 5 years of silence." I sat for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. Outside, the wind carried the scent of fading magnolias. Maggie used to say, if a song makes someone want to love again, it isn't over yet. Maybe ours, hers, and mine had just started playing again. That evening, a knock echoed from the porch. When I opened the door, Evan stood there. No tailored suit this time, just a tired young man with eyes too old for his age. "Dad." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I never meant for it to end up like this." I looked at him, then at the copy of the ceremony program still lying on my desk, his mother's name printed in faint, blurred ink. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, son. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." He nodded, eyes wet, and for the first time since the wedding, he didn't look away. Far down the river, the sun sank like a coin into water. The sky turned bronze. The light on the current flickered like an old mirror. And somewhere in that wind, I could almost hear Maggie laughing, soft, steady, free. Later that night, the phone rang. Adrian's voice came through, calm as ever. "They're starting to crumble. Evelyn just lost 2 major contracts. But this is only the overture." "I don't need them ruined," I said quietly. "I just need them to understand what it feels like to be looked down on." A pause. Then his voice low and sure. "Understanding is sometimes the heaviest punishment." I hung up, stood by the window. Out on the river, the fishermen's boats glowed like scattered notes of light, each lantern a quiet beat in the dark. And I knew the symphony of justice had just found its next rhythm. That afternoon, after Evan left the porch, I stood there for a long time watching the wind move through his hair as he walked down the gravel path. The Savannah River carried the scent of magnolia from somewhere far downstream. In my hand was still that folded newspaper, the one with the headline, "The Father Who Didn't Flinch." I didn't feel proud, just tired. Tired of watching a generation that thinks it already knows everything until truth slaps them hard enough to make them listen. Inside the house, phone began to ring. I let it echo for a while, thinking it would stop. It didn't. When I finally picked up, a familiar low voice came through. "Step outside," Adrian said. "Savannah looks best when people think they've already lost." I walked down the gravel path toward the lake behind Magnolia House, the place where everything began. The sun hung low, laying sheets of gold across the water like 1,000 trembling mirrors. Adrian sat there, the same dark blue suit, no tie this time. 2 cups of coffee balanced on the bench beside him. "I figured you'd come back," he said without looking up. "I didn't come back," I told him. "I just needed to hear the silence from where it started." He smiled faintly. "Silence here isn't what it used to be." He was right. The sounds of clinking glasses, forced laughter, and a jazz band struggling to stay in rhythm drifted out from the hall behind us. The sounds of a celebration trying to convince itself it was still alive. "You always did stand still in the middle of a storm, didn't you?" The remark pulled me back. I turned. He handed me one of the coffees. "I don't drink," I said. "I know." Neither did Maggie. Hearing her name out loud froze something inside me. Adrian sat down on the wooden bench beneath the oak tree by the water, motioning for me to join him. The wind rolled across the lake, breaking the reflections into soft, rippling circles. "I made Maggie a promise," he said quietly. "If you ever forgot the best part of yourself, I'd remind you." She believed music and kindness are never lost, just buried under the noise. From his inner pocket, he pulled out a yellowed envelope. "She left this for me. Told me to give it back when the time was right." He handed it to me. The handwriting on the front slanted, gently strong but tender. "To Adrian, keep the rhythm of kindness." Maggie's hand. I would have known it anywhere. When I opened it, the faint smell of old paper and pine drifted out the scent of our garage, back when I still tuned pianos by hand. Inside were 3 thin pages and a small cassette tape labeled in pencil for CM. The first sheet began softly, like her voice used to when she didn't want to wake me. "If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. But I trust someone still remembers the kindness we tried to keep." Her words were simple, but I could hear her tone in each one. She wrote about the years I buried myself in work, how I stopped playing, how Sundays grew quiet after the piano was closed. She mentioned Evan. "He has your ears, Calvin. If one day he forgets how to listen, forgive him. He carries our hearts, he just hasn't learned how to use them." At the end came a line that stole my breath. "When you hear this song again, don't think of me. Think of the part of you that got lost when the world became too loud." Adrian handed me a small tape player, old and scuffed. "Fresh batteries," he said. "Kindness deserves to be heard the old way." I pressed play. Static crackled, and then her voice. "Calvin, don't let silence kill you. Use it to make them listen." The piano followed, hesitant at first, keys slightly out of tune, her voice humming along, soft and human and real. I didn't cry. But my eyes found their own way. When the tape clicked to an end, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the light on the water had gone from gold to copper. "Why did she send this to you?" I asked. Adrian looked at the fading sky. "She knew if she sent it to you, you'd lock it away. But if she gave it to me, I'd wait for the right moment to bring it back." A laugh escaped me, half tear, half breath. She always had to win. "No," Adrian said softly. "She just always kept time." A small wind swept across the lake. Somewhere behind us, the chimes on the restaurant porch began to ring, light, lingering like a goodbye, whispered twice. Adrian told me how he'd known Maggie. They'd both studied at the Asheville Conservatory of Music. She was the only person who made me believe kindness could survive in a dishonest world. He paused, watching the ripples catch the last streak of light. "I thought I'd marry her once," he admitted. "But she chose you." I didn't feel jealousy, just recognition. Some people come into your life to teach you how to love by losing you. After she died, he said he discovered Monroe Group had seized land belonging to a small music school for tax purposes. He bought their hotel chain not for profit, but for correction. Then Evelyn Monroe thought she could erase Maggie's name from her son's vows without anyone noticing. He turned toward me. But some names never fade. The wind shifted colder now. The river's rhythm slowed like even nature was listening. "I need your help," Adrian said. His voice deepened, quiet but steady. "I can't take on that empire alone. I need someone with a reason to fight, someone who won't fight for money." "Why me?" I asked. He held my gaze. "Because only those who've been humiliated truly understand pride." The words struck hard, but not cruelly. He wasn't looking for pity. He was offering purpose. "What's your plan?" I asked finally. "No plan," he said. "A reminder. They forgot who Maggie Mercer was. I intend to make them remember." "You want revenge?" He shook his head. "No, I want balance." The wind turned again. The river darkened to steel. Lantern lights flickered along the distant bank. "Tomorrow," Adrian said, "you'll receive a letter from Monroe Group. They'll try to buy your silence." "You're sure?" "Very. Because the people who once dismissed you always assume you're cheap." I tightened my grip on the envelope in my hand. It still smelled faintly of lavender, Maggie's scent, the one she used to keep in the closet, so her dresses smelled like spring. I looked up, the last light of the day, trembling on the water. "And if I don't stay silent," Adrian smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Then the music starts again. And this time you'll be the one keeping time." I didn't answer. Didn't need to. We sat there as the night crept in, watching the river take the last of the light. Each shimmer on the surface looked like a note waiting to be played. Behind us, the wedding hall still glowed, but the celebration was long over. A different song had begun, one composed of truth and silence and something dangerously close to justice. Morning settled over Savannah like a gray curtain of smoke. A fine drizzle veiled the river, and the old rooftops glistened like tarnished silver. I sat by the window, my hands cupped around a cooling mug of coffee, watching raindrops trace slow lines down the glass, each one dragging time along with it. The patter on the tin roof above sounded like an orchestra tuning up before a concert, chaotic, uncertain, but full of something waiting to begin. Inside the house, I could hear nothing but my own breathing. It wasn't peace. It was the pause before a new movement. Then the phone rang, a sharp sound against the hush. I didn't plan to answer, but the ringing refused to stop, persistent, rhythmic, like fate knocking in 4/4 time. "Mr. Mercer." A woman's voice, low, calm, professional. "This is Laura Chen, Mr. Harlow's attorney. He's asked me to invite you to the office at 10 a.m. There are some documents you need to see." "I'll be there," I said simply. 10 o'clock. The glass tower on Bay Street shimmered above the river, its mirrored facade reflecting the churn of brown water below. Inside the lobby, every head turned slightly when Adrian Harlow entered. He carried the kind of gravity that made people lower their voices, the respect reserved for men who could reroute entire cities with one phone call. He was waiting for me by the elevator. Rain had soaked his hair, but his expression was steady, almost peaceful. "Come on, Calvin," he said. "Time to clean the stage." The conference room was walled in frosted glass, soundproof and cold. Light spilled across a dark wooden table, and the air felt as still as a recording studio seconds before a record is pressed. A woman rose to greet me, mid-50s, poised, eyes bright with intelligence. "Laura Chen," she said, shaking my hand. "An honor to finally meet the man Maggie Mercer once called the song that never stops playing." I froze. "You knew my wife," Laura smiled softly. "She taught my daughter piano at the community center. My girl still keeps the sheet music Maggie signed for her." Something caught in my throat. Even gone, Maggie was still teaching, still echoing in places I'd never thought to look. Adrian took his seat at the head of the table and slid a thick binder toward me. On its cover, bold type read, "Monroe Hospitality Group Confidential Audit." Laura opened the first page, her tone precise and steady. "They're over $38 million in debt, most of it in guaranteed loans. More importantly, all their hotels, including Magnolia House, sit on city-leased land. And those leases," she said, "now belong to Mr. Harlow." I turned to Adrian. "So that means," he spoke slowly, each word deliberate, "if I revoke the lease, Monroe Group collapses within 90 days. The room fell silent. Rain tapped against the glass, steady and unhurried. In that rhythm, I could almost hear Maggie's voice again. "Justice doesn't need to shout only to stay in time." "You really intend to do that?" I asked quietly. Adrian smiled faintly, his gaze never leaving the documents. "No, I don't want to destroy them. I want them to give back what they stole." Laura reached for another folder, thinner, older, the paper yellowed at the edges. "This," she said, "is the Maggie Mercer Foundation, filed in 2019 as a music scholarship fund. Monroe Group claimed stewardship, but not a single cent was ever distributed." My hands tightened on the table. "They used her even after she died," Laura nodded. "They used her name for tax exemptions. And yesterday, after the wedding, they filed to dissolve the foundation. The listed reason, no surviving legal heirs." Adrian stood, pulled a document from his briefcase, and laid it before me. "I bought the rights to her name and image this morning." He tapped the notarized seal. "You're now co-owner Calvin. Her name belongs to the right hands again." I stared at the signature, feeling as though someone had just placed my wife's honor back on the table where it belonged. "Thank you," I said, my voice rough. "Don't thank me," he replied. "I'm just keeping a promise. The rest is yours to conduct." He turned to Laura. "Schedule a press conference. Not to humiliate them, to resurrect the Maggie Mercer Foundation. Calvin will serve as director, and Monroe Group will fund it as their own forged contracts once promised." Laura smiled. "Brilliant. They can't object and they can't escape. The law's already written on our side." "And if they refuse?" I asked. Adrian shrugged lightly. "Then I revoke every operating license they have, within 24 hours. But I'd rather let them choose their own humiliation." I leaned back in my chair. My pulse was fast, but it wasn't fear. For the first time in years, I felt weight return to my name, a place in the world that couldn't be bought or reassigned. Adrian's eyes met mine. "Calvin Maggie once told me, he's so gentle no one even hears him when he stands up. It's time they listen." "I'm not looking to be a hero," I said quietly. I just want fairness." "Fairness," he said, spoken in the voice of someone the world once ignored. "That's the purest form of revenge." We finished around noon. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped. Savannah was washed in silver light umbrellas, black as ink, moving along the avenue street lamps, reflecting off the wet pavement in long, trembling streaks. I stood beneath the awning, breathing in the cool air. The city was louder than ever, yet something inside me had gone perfectly still, the stillness of a man hearing a melody return after years of silence. As I stepped toward my car, Adrian called out behind me, his voice carrying through the rain. "Calvin, if Evelyn Monroe comes to you, don't turn her away. Let her speak. People who spend their lives giving orders always break when they're forced to beg." I nodded once, then drove off. Rain blurred the world into watercolor lights, stretching into long gold smears across the windshield. Maggie's voice rose again in memory. "Real music isn't in the notes, but in the silence between them." And I finally understood this war wouldn't need noise, only timing. By late afternoon, the rain began to thin. I had just set my empty cup on the table when the doorbell rang. Through the window, a silhouette waited under the porch light, a rigid posture, a coat of dark leather, and the faint, unmistakable scent of expensive perfume. Evelyn Monroe. Her eyes, cold, proud, held the same sharpness as always, but beneath the powder and precision was something new, fatigue. She smiled, a blade disguised as grace. "We need to talk, Mr. Mercer." By late afternoon, the rain had stopped. The light over Savannah was thin and metallic, sliding through the window in one narrow blade across the wooden floor, sharp, cold, deliberate. The house felt suspended like the last rest at the end of a long symphony. I brewed tea, set the kettle aside, and switched on the old phonograph. The record spun. The needle found its groove. Maggie's piano rose soft, tremulous, like a soul still singing somewhere out of sight. I sat and listened. Outside, the rain was gone, but wind still brushed the porch, carrying the damp smell of earth and the faint sweetness of magnolia from the riverbank. When the doorbell rang, I didn't startle. Adrian had warned me people who live on command always appear the moment they feel control slipping. I opened the door. Evelyn Monroe stood there. Beige wool coat, black Hermes bag, oversized sunglasses hiding half her face. The scent of Chanel 1957 filled the doorway, a declaration more than a fragrance. "I'm not here to apologize. I'm here to manage." "Mr. Mercer," she purred, voice smooth as velvet stretched over steel. "Thank you for receiving me. I thought we should talk privately. To prevent further misunderstanding." I stepped aside. No greeting, no invitation. Just space. She entered, her eyes gliding over the room, the wood-paneled walls, the worn piano, the framed photo of Maggie beside it. Her gaze lingered for half a second, then moved on as if appraising an artifact, not a memory. "Cozy," she said. "My daughter was overwhelmed that day. The press, the cameras. You know how large weddings can be. So much pressure." I said nothing. She mistook silence for forgiveness. "People like her always do. Shall we sit?" I gestured toward the chair across the wooden table. No tea, no pastries, just distance. She set her bag neatly by her feet and drew out a thick white envelope, sliding it toward me across the table. "A gesture of goodwill," she said, smiling with eyes that never softened. $50,000, enough for you to move somewhere quieter. Perhaps leaving Savannah would do you good." I looked at the envelope, then at her. "Why? Because sometimes," she replied evenly, "silence is worth more than dignity." Her words landed like cold metal. I thought of the years Maggie had taught free piano lessons to children whose parents could barely afford bus fare, while women like Evelyn hosted charity galas to dodge taxes under the glow of chandeliers. I pushed the envelope back. "Too low," I said. Her eyes sharpened, feline, amused. "How much do you want, then?" "I wasn't talking about money," I said. "I was talking about dignity." A flicker cracked across her composure, a hairline fracture through the porcelain of her pride. Then she laughed, hollow and brittle. "Dignity doesn't pay bills, Mr. Mercer. I thought a man like you would know that." I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the Savannah River caught the late sun, its surface moving slow, deliberate, like thought made liquid. "Do you hear the water?" I asked. She frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I worked with sound for 40 years. People think running water is just noise, but if you really listen, it has rhythm, the rhythm of time. It reminds me that nothing stays still forever, not even power." I turned, picked up the envelope, looked straight at her, and tore it in half. The first bill slid to the table. The sound was barely a whisper yet. In that silence it rang out like the downbeat of a new movement. Evelyn rose sharply. "You're making a mistake. You have no idea who you're up against." "I don't need to," I said quietly. "I just know I'm not selling my silence to anyone." "You'll regret this," she hissed. "I can make you disappear from Savannah with one call." I smiled. "Do you know how many people lose their souls just because they're afraid of losing their seat?" We faced each other. Then two worlds, one wrapped in gold, the other clinging to the only thing gold can't buy. She grabbed her bag, turned for the door. "Mrs. Monroe," I said. She stopped, turned, eyes like cut glass. "I don't know what made you think I'm easy to buy, but if you'd like to keep trying, go ahead. Just remember, some battles aren't fought in courtrooms. They're fought in the public eye." A tremor passed through her shoulders, barely visible. Then she left. Her heels struck the wooden floor, each step a sharp, coffin-nailing rhythm. When the door closed, the air still held the perfume, heavy, claustrophobic, like smoke in a windowless room. I bent down, picked up a torn scrap of paper from the table. The ink had blurred from the rain on her coat, but the number was still legible, $50,000. I crumpled it, dropped it in the trash. At that moment, I didn't know that a security camera across the street, mounted on the hotel facade, had captured her leaving face, twisted with fury. Nor did I know that a local journalist, one who owed Adrian Harlow a favor, would receive that footage within hours. That night my phone buzzed. A text from Adrian Good. "You hit the right tempo. Now let them react." I typed back. "When they start buying silence, it means they're already afraid." I set the phone down, returned to the table, and played Maggie's record again. The piano started slow, then quickened. Midway through, there was a tiny break, a pause she'd left as if saving space for me. I closed my eyes, let the notes fill the room, the kind that don't ask to be understood, only felt. Then a faint rustle by the door. I stood. A thin envelope had slid through the mail slot, landing softly on the rug. No cash. Just one typed page, words pressed hard into the paper. "If you don't stay quiet, you'll lose more than your reputation." I read it once, folded it neatly, and set it on the table beside the torn money. Outside, the river gleamed under the city lights, a black score marked with tiny shining notes. I smiled and whispered, "It's begun, Maggie. This time I won't be silent." I didn't sleep that night. The note lay on the table beside the window. Its paper rippled from rain ink, bleeding slowly into the wood grain. If you don't stay quiet, you'll lose more than your reputation. I stared at it for hours. Even smudged and wrinkled, each word still gleamed sharp like a score written in fear. Just before dawn, the rain started again, soft, steady, relentless. When I finally drifted off, the phone buzzed. First a text, then another, then a call, then a dozen emails. I reached for the screen, its glow slicing the dimness of the room. Breaking news, Monroe wedding clip goes viral, watch now. I tapped the first link. The footage was shaky, muffled, but clear enough to cut through skin. Claire's voice came first, smooth, cold, perfectly enunciated over laughter and clinking glasses. Put him in the back row. I don't want him in the frame. Then one beat later, the voice of Reverend Whitmore. Before we begin, let us take a moment to remember Mrs. Margaret Mercer. Silence. The camera panned, and there I was, an old man sitting quietly, eyes reflecting candlelight. No words, no reaction, just silence. Then the clip ended. 47 seconds. 47 seconds that lit the fuse. By noon, the video had passed 3 million views. Headlines flooded every feed, father banished from son's wedding, the silence that shamed America. Beneath them, thousands of comments. I've never seen cruelty look so polished. That man deserves a public apology. Sometimes silence is the most elegant revenge. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. What I felt wasn't peace, it was a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes when justice finally clears its throat. Outside, the rain eased. The morning light stretched thin across the wall like the slow breath of someone waking from a long coma. I set the phone down, poured another cup of tea, and heard Maggie's voice again, a whisper moving through the air. Justice doesn't need to shout, only to stay in rhythm. By afternoon, the phone rang again. Evan. His voice trembled, frayed with exhaustion and fear. Dad. I'm sorry. I didn't know the clip would get out. I never wanted it to go this far. I waited a few seconds before speaking. What are you sorry for, Evan? The video being released or what it revealed? Silence. I could hear him breathing, each inhale like a swallowed confession. I just don't want to lose everything, he said finally. You're not losing anything, I told him softly. You're learning what silence costs. He exhaled sharp and uneven. Then the line went dead. That's when I realized Evan wasn't afraid of shame. He was afraid of being seen. Evening crept in with another call. Adrian. You've seen the news. I've seen it, I said. Didn't think it would spread this fast. Not fast, he replied, voice carrying the faint smile of a man who understands timing better than luck. Just right on cue. People only see when they're ready to look. I turned on the television. A live broadcast from Magnolia House. Reporters crowded the gates, their umbrellas bobbing like restless waves. Behind them, a crowd held handmade signs, "Respect Elders." At the bottom of the screen, the ticker rolled, "Monroe Group under fire for humiliating groom's father at lavish wedding." The feed cut to Evelyn Monroe, hair pulled tight, white suit, crisp expression frozen. This was simply a misunderstanding, she said, her voice dry, her smile mechanical. Our family has always valued the elderly. I switched the TV off. The room fell silent again. But this time the silence didn't belong to me. It belonged to them, the people who once believed they'd never have to bow their heads. Around 6, someone knocked at the door. A delivery man handed me a small envelope, no return address. Inside a single printed note. They're shaking, Calvin. Don't speak. Let the public do it for you. A.H. I folded it, set it on the table beside the others. Through the open window, the air carried the salt of the river and the chaos of reporters outside. Looking down, I saw the street lined with news vans, cables, microphones, and flashes bursting like stray constellations. Someone shouted, "Get a shot of his house," I laughed quietly. Funny, I thought, to be seen sometimes, all you have to do is sit still. By nightfall, camera lights still glowed through my window, washing the walls in a pale blue halo. I sat beneath it, hand resting on Maggie's music box. When I turned the key, the familiar tune began, soft, distant, imperfect. Halfway through there, it was again that tiny pause she left in the melody. "I left that space for you," she'd once said. "I'm listening, Maggie," I whispered. The phone vibrated once more. "Adrian." His voice came low, steady, but charged like a live wire. "They're in emergency session. Evelyn's blaming Claire. Claire's collapsing. Evan's unraveling. He may call you any minute." "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Nothing," he said. "Just listen. What he says next will decide where this story goes." There was a pause. Then, almost wearily, Adrian added, "When powerful women panic, they tell the truth. When weak men panic, they learn to apologize. Tonight, you'll hear both." I looked at the clock. 11:47 p.m. The city was still as the river itself. I knew the next call would come before midnight. I didn't rehearse. Didn't plan. I simply wound the music box again, listening as the spring tightened, each turn a heartbeat steady and sure. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I was waiting to see if my son was brave enough to hear the truth. I didn't sleep that night. The wind pressed against the old wooden frames, and the cry of nightbirds carried faintly over the Savannah River. The city felt suspended in a strange stillness, not peaceful, but the quiet of a place where everyone was whispering the same name. 12:03 a.m. 3 quick knocks, 1 slow. I knew the rhythm, Evan. When I opened the door, he was nothing like the groom from that wedding night. Just a young man, spent hollow-eyed shirt, wrinkled shoulders wet with rain. "Dad, can I come in?" I nodded and stepped aside. No words. He walked across the porch, his expensive shoes leaving a trail of water on the old wood floor. He sat, both hands gripping his phone like a confession. "I was wrong," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the table. "That's what people usually say," I answered, when they're afraid of losing something. He looked up, panic flickering behind his eyes. "You think I'm scared? I just don't know what to do when everything falls apart." The lamplight cut his face in half, one side lit the other, drowned in shadow. "If you don't know what to do when someone humiliates your father," I said evenly, "then maybe you've never truly been a son." He went still, hands trembling. Finally, he whispered, "You don't understand, Dad. The world I live in, it's not like yours. People don't see with their hearts anymore. They see through brands, through followers, through headlines. Claire and her mother, they own that world. I was just trying to stay balanced." I spoke slowly, letting each word find its weight. "There's no balance between right and wrong, Evan. There's only choice." He gave a broken laugh, a sound too thin to be real. "I just wanted peace. I didn't want to lose my wife, or my career. And in the process, I said softly, 'You lost yourself.'" The room fell still again, just the ticking clock and the wind hissing under the porch. Evan covered his face with both hands. I thought staying silent meant keeping the peace. I thought speaking up would ruin everything. I moved closer, my voice low but steady. You've already lost everything, Evan. Not because they took it, but because you handed it to them. He looked up, eyes red, voice cracking. What do you want me to do, apologize publicly? I shook my head. No. I want you to stand upright. Justice doesn't need apologies. It needs action. What kind of action? You already know, I said. I turned toward the kitchen, but his voice caught me at the doorway. Dad. They're planning to sue you. I stopped. Evelyn says you're using the media to defame their family. They have lawyers, people in the city council. I smiled faintly. Good. When the powerful resort to lawsuits against the powerless, it means they've already lost power. Evan stood, fists clenched. Aren't you afraid? No, I said. Fear is how they control you, and they can't control someone who has nothing left to lose. He hesitated, his voice shrinking to almost a whisper. Dad. Claire's falling apart. She's getting death threats. She won't eat, won't go outside. That isn't revenge, I said calmly. That's reflection. People are just looking into the mirror she built. Evan froze. I don't know how to help her. I rested a hand on his shoulder. Start by living right. If you want to protect your family, begin by not letting them teach you how to be human. The air thickened. Only the golden lamplight and our breathing remained. After a long pause, Evan opened his phone. I want to write something. Public. Not to defend myself, just to tell the truth. Then write with your heart, I said, not with fear. He bowed his head, thumbs trembling as he typed. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he read aloud. My name is Evan Mercer. I stayed silent while the man who taught me kindness was humiliated. I chose convenience over conscience. I don't want forgiveness, I just want to be worthy of the man who raised me. I watched him. In that light, I saw something I hadn't in years, a trace of Maggie, the same steadiness she had the day she watched me play my first song again after the accident. Post it, I said. Evan inhaled deeply and pressed publish. The screen glowed. Published. We sat in silence, no words left. Outside, the rain began again, soft, deliberate like a metronome, marking the tempo of a song changing key. I looked at my son. In his eyes, I saw both relief and fear. Don't be afraid, Evan, I said quietly. Silence has already spoken. Now it's your turn to listen. The morning after. I woke to pale sunlight bleeding through the curtains. The phone buzzed endlessly on the table. Evan's post had spread everywhere, 10 million views, hundreds of thousands of comments. On the morning news, a host read the final lines aloud, voice trembling. The story of the father cast out of his son's wedding has made millions of Americans reconsider what family really means. I turned off the television, leaned back in my chair. Outside, the first birds of morning sang clear, bright, unashamed. For the first time in years, when I heard someone say the name Mercer, I didn't bow my head. I smiled, because at last, that name had found the rhythm of dignity again. 2 days after Evan's post, Savannah still hadn't quieted down. News anchors, podcasts, morning talk shows, everyone was talking about the father cast out of his son's wedding. National networks began calling. A journalist from New York wrote in The Atlantic, in a country addicted to noise, Calvin Mercer's silence sounded like a symphony. I read that line and felt no pride, only sorrow. Because to earn a beautiful sentence, a man sometimes has to walk through too much humiliation. The phone rang non-stop. Evan refused every interview. Claire vanished from social media. And Evelyn Monroe, like all the rich who can smell a crisis, chose the only path they ever trust: control the story. On the third morning, a white envelope arrived with the Monroe Group logo. Not an invitation, a polite threat. Mrs. Evelyn Monroe will hold a press conference at Magnolia House. You may attend, if you wish to hear the truth. I laughed softly. The truth from a woman who once priced silence at $50,000. Moments later, Adrian called. You got the letter I did? Are you going? Of course. A good piece of music doesn't stop on a wrong note. His voice lowered. Good, but let me keep the tempo. By noon, Savannah air hung thick with river moisture. The grand ballroom of Magnolia House glittered perfume and camera flashes blending into one electric haze. Reporters packed every aisle, microphones raised like a forest of steel. On stage stood Evelyn Monroe, silver hair, immaculate white suit, perfectly tailored, a $1 million smile polished to the last molecule. Behind her, the Monroe Group logo loomed across half the wall, a cathedral of branding. To her left and right, lawyers and PR handlers with the brittle calm of people trying to steady a sinking ship. Evelyn began her tone molten sugar. My family is deeply hurt by the misunderstandings of recent days. We have always valued family respect for elders, and above all, the legacy of those who came before us. I sat in the last row, surrounded by a field of lenses. The same seat as at the wedding, only this time the lights weren't pointed at me. She continued reading each word like a note, rehearsed in front of a mirror. To demonstrate our goodwill, the Monroe Group will donate $50,000 to the Maggie Mercer Foundation as a gesture of reconciliation and mutual respect. I closed my eyes. A deliberate echo, the same amount she once offered me to stay silent. She wasn't apologizing. She was buying back dignity at the original price. And then the rear doors opened. A hush rippled through the room. Adrian Harlow stepped in. No entourage, no announcement. Dark gray suit, white shirt, no tie. Light struck his silver hair like a blade drawn across the stage. Every camera turned. The air filled with clicks and whispers. Evelyn froze. Mr. Harlow, I don't recall inviting you. Adrian smiled faintly. And I don't recall needing an invitation to tell the truth. Her attorney moved forward quickly. Sir, this is a private press event. Adrian cut him off, his voice low but resonant. There is no privacy once justice enters the frame, counselor. The room stilled. No one breathed. He walked to the center aisle, speaking without a microphone, a man who had learned how to make silence his amplifier. 3 years ago, the Monroe Group used the name of the late Mrs. Margaret Mercer to claim federal tax exemptions for the Magnolia House project. Not a single dollar ever reached her music scholarship fund. Instead, $1.2 million were rerouted into a private account under the Monroe Foundation. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's face blanched. That's a lie. Adrian opened his leather case and lifted a stack of documents high. Then I'm sure you won't mind if I make this contract public. Behind her, the projector flickered to life. 3 names appeared in bold: Evelyn Monroe, Claire Monroe, Margaret Mercer. Beside them, a red annotation. Signature verified, forged. The room erupted, flashes strobing like lightning, voices colliding 100 questions at once. Evelyn staggered half a step back. I stayed seated. Still, listening as one does when an orchestra finally returns to the right key. She tried to steady herself. We acted on financial counsel. Adrian interrupted, his gaze slicing through her words. That department I purchased last week. They're cooperating with me. The original ledgers have already been handed to the Federal Department of Justice. Silence. Pure, perfect silence. The kind that follows a verdict. Then Adrian lowered his voice, addressing the cameras directly. As of today, the Maggie Mercer Foundation will be reinstated under the stewardship of Mr. Calvin Mercer. All profits from Magnolia House will fund scholarships for underprivileged students who love music, as was Mrs. Mercer's original wish. Every lens swung toward me. I only nodded. No speech. No performance. Justice doesn't need volume, only witnesses who stay long enough to listen. Evelyn sank into her chair. Her attorney leaned in, murmuring, but the reporters had already surged forward. One voice rose above the crowd. Mrs. Monroe. Did you personally order? The groom's father moved to the back row at the wedding. The air froze. Evelyn looked around, searching for an exit that no longer existed. She inhaled slowly. Her answer came out raw. Yes. But I thought he wouldn't mind. The sentence dropped like a marble into porcelain, small, clean, and shattering. No gavel, no courtroom. Just the sound of arrogance breaking itself. Adrian leaned slightly toward me. You hear that, Calvin? I do, I said, eyes still on the stage. That's the sound of power realizing it's smaller than it thought. When the conference ended, I stepped into the hallway. Sunlight streamed through the glass walls, glinting off the polished tile like liquid metal. Reporters rushed behind me, microphones extended. Mr. Mercer. Do you have a message for the Monroe family? I stopped, turned, spoke quietly, but every recorder caught it. No message. Just a reminder of something my wife used to teach her students. Music is only beautiful when you know how to listen to someone else. The corridor fell still. No one asked another question. Outside, a crowd had gathered by the hotel gates. When I walked out, they began to clap, slow, steady, not like applause, but like understanding. I've never been comfortable with clapping. But in that sound, I heard exactly what Maggie once told me: justice doesn't always need a courtroom. Sometimes it only needs the right person, the right moment, and a silence patient enough to wait. I stepped down the marble stairs. The late afternoon light spilled across my shoulders, warm, weightless. For the first time in years, Savannah didn't feel like a city of ghosts. It felt like a place where silence had finally learned to speak in tune. I thought the world would quiet down after the press conference at Magnolia House. It didn't. It only changed tempo. If the days before had been a storm of outrage, Savannah now moved to a slower rhythm, the rhythm of consequence. The networks replayed the footage every hour. My name, Calvin Mercer, flashed across CNN beneath the headline, "Father cast out of son's wedding, now becomes a symbol of dignity." I didn't feel proud. I only felt lighter, as if the weight I'd carried for years had finally been set down. Not because I was celebrated, but because the truth had finally found a place to stand. That night the phone rang. Evan. His voice was hoarse, tired, but more genuine than I'd ever heard it. Dad, they're being investigated. Magnolia House is under audit. Claire's mother has been called in by federal attorneys. Investors are pulling out. He paused. Claire's in shock. She doesn't eat. She doesn't sleep. She's afraid to go outside. I stayed silent. Through the line, I heard the faint sound of him exhaling like wind through a hollow pipe. Dad, I don't know whether to pity them or hate them. Don't choose, I said. Just feel it. Sometimes compassion and justice can share the same room. He didn't reply right away. Then softly, I've resigned from Monroe Group. I can't work for people who treated my father like an inconvenience. I closed my eyes, feeling my heartbeat slow like the fade of a song. Are you sure? Yes, I'm leaving Savannah for a while. Where to Raleigh? I want to start over. Maybe open a small studio. Mom used to say music is the only way to hear yourself think. The words caught in my throat. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. Then listen, Evan. And this time, don't let anyone turn your music off. 2 days later, the world found a new target. Not me, but Claire Monroe. She appeared on a national morning show. Not to apologize, but to cry. Tears streaked through her makeup, and her voice trembled. I've been attacked online, called manipulative, heartless. I just wanted to protect my family's image. The host leaned in gently, but her words cut clean as glass. And tell me, Claire, was that image worth more than the truth? Claire bowed her head. She couldn't answer. The screen shifted to footage of Evelyn Monroe signing the forged contract, bearing Maggie Mercer's name, the camera zooming close on the trembling pen. Then a clip outside a law office, Evelyn exhausted, speaking hoarsely into microphones. Maybe. I was too proud. I turned off the TV. Those words weren't for me. They were for the audience. The only apology I'd ever needed had already been given by my son on the night he dared to speak the truth. The next afternoon, Adrian Harlow came by. No suit, no polished demeanor, just an old man carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. We sat on the porch, the river before us, painted in streaks of late afternoon gold. So he said, we've reached the quiet part. For now, I replied. Justice has a longer melody than most people think. He smiled, pulled a folded newspaper from his coat pocket. On the front page, a bold headline, Maggie Mercer Foundation, restored first music scholarship, announced for Georgia students. Below it, a photo of me standing beside a plaque, etched with Maggie's name. The sunlight cut across my face, and in that captured moment, I looked calm, not triumphant, just at peace. You see, Adrian said, eyes on the water. Silence, when used right, travels farther than any scream. Yes, I said, but silence still needs someone to listen. He chuckled softly, and I listened. Maggie was right about you. We sat there for a long time. No more words, just the sounds that remain when the noise dies down the lap of the river, the whisper of the wind chime, the slow breathing of a world catching itself after the storm. A slow peace. Melancholy. But beautiful, the kind Maggie used to love, a piano ending on a perfect, lingering rest. That night I stayed up later than usual. The desk lamp cast its soft circle over Maggie's photograph. Her smile gentle, distant, like an old moon still lighting the river. I was about to turn off the light when the computer chimed. New email. Sender anonymous. Subject, justice isn't finished. I opened it. Inside a single line. They didn't just steal money. They covered up an employee's accident at Magnolia House 2020. Attached was an audio file. I clicked play. Evelyn Monroe's voice, sharp, unmistakable, no one is to mention it. I'll handle the matter. Then silence. The sound cut off, leaving only the faint rain tapping the roof above me. I turned toward Maggie's picture. The lamplight flickered across the glass, a small shimmer like the breath of someone unseen. Looks like their lesson isn't over yet, is it? Maggie. Outside the Savannah River lay dark as ink, the wind carrying the scent of salt and rust. I knew then the symphony of justice wasn't done playing, and somewhere the final note was already tuning itself to be heard. I opened that email at least 3 times. Subject: justice isn't finished. No sender. Just a cold signature R17. Below it a single audio file. Evelyn Monroe's voice filled the room, clear, even, and calm enough to terrify. No one is to mention it. I'll handle it. I stopped the recording. My pulse struck hard, not out of fear, but instinct. This wasn't meant for the press. It was meant for those who had seen the shadows behind the lights of the Monroe Empire. I called Adrian Harlow. He answered on the first ring, wind howling faintly in the background. He was driving. "I'm guessing you got it too," he said. "No greeting needed. You know who sent it?" "Not yet. But if I had to guess, someone who once worked at Magnolia House. How many people left that place in 2020? 23. But only one disappeared from the HR records." Why, Adrian paused. Then quietly, "Because she died." 3 hours later, we met at a small cafe near the Savannah docks. Light from the window shimmered on the water, casting golden ripples across the table. It looked peaceful, the kind of peace that makes you forget how many secrets are buried beneath the river. Adrian slid a thin folder across to me. On the cover, Case number MNH 2217, Sylvia Grant, housekeeping staff. 28, he said evenly. Report lists accidental death during a night shift at Magnolia House. I opened it. Photos of the scene: a smear of blood on tile, shattered glass, a broken employee badge. The internal memo read, "Slipped down stairwell after drinking on duty." But the signature section was erased. Only one name remained half visible under correction fluid: Claire Monroe. "My daughter-in-law," I whispered. "She was involved." "Not directly," Adrian said, "but she was there that night. And Evelyn. She handled the cleanup, paid the family off, forced them to sign a non-disclosure agreement." I leaned back. This was no longer a story about dignity. This was a story about a death buried beneath a chandelier inside a hotel that sold itself as paradise. Adrian's voice turned rough. "I traced the family. They still live outside Macon. Father's a retired carpenter, widowed, raising a 12-year-old granddaughter." "What are you planning to do?" I asked. He looked at me for a long time. "Not me. You. Maggie once told me Calvin always knows how to make the truth hit the right note." 2 days later, I drove to Macon. The road wound through pine woods, the air thick with resin and damp soil. Gray clouds hung low light, soft as smoke. It felt like driving through one of Maggie's unfinished compositions, a melody written for souls who never got to be heard. At the end of a dirt lane stood a small house. An old man sat on the porch, thin, silver-haired eyes hollow, but alert. When I introduced myself, he nodded once. "I know who you are. You're the man they threw out of his own son's wedding." The sentence broke every barrier. We sat by a cracked wooden table. I told him about Maggie, about the scholarship fund, about the truth behind Monroe Group's shine. Then I said Sylvia's name. His hands clenched, rough knuckles trembling. "They said she was drunk," he rasped. "But that night she called me. Said something strange was going on in the VIP suite, the one reserved for Monroe's daughter. Then the line went dead." He swallowed hard. Next morning, they brought her body back. Said it was an accident. "Do you still have anything from that night?" I asked softly, afraid to disturb what little peace he had left. He rose, disappeared inside, and returned with a small battered recorder. "She used it for guest complaints," he said. "I never played it. But it was still on when they found her." I pressed play. Static. Then Sylvia's voice, shaky, breathless. "Miss Claire, don't open that bottle. That's industrial cleaner. Oh my God, careful, a crash." A short scream. Silence. The room froze. Outside, rain began tapping the porch roof, soft and even like the heartbeat of someone alive listening to another's death. "I don't want anything," the old man said quietly. "Just let people know my daughter wasn't drunk." "I promise," I said. That night, I brought the tape to Adrian. He listened to the entire thing, eyes closed. When it ended, he stayed silent for nearly a minute. Then his voice came out low and sharp. "We won't leak this to the press. We'll take it straight to the feds, the right people, the right process." "And Evelyn," I asked. "This time she won't be humiliated. She'll be prosecuted." I nodded. And in that moment I understood revenge was no longer about punishment. It was about giving back a voice to those who had been silenced. 3 weeks later, the case was reopened. The FBI announced a new investigation into Sylvia Grant's death. They found the original non-disclosure agreement buried in Monroe Group's accounting archives. Evelyn Monroe was charged with concealment of death and document tampering. Claire was subpoenaed as a witness. The city talked about the Monroe family again, but this time no one pitied them. I didn't go on television. I just listened to the morning radio. The anchor's voice came through steady, solemn. "The anonymous whistleblower known as R17 has been identified as a former maintenance technician at Magnolia House who kept a backup of the recording out of admiration for the late Maggie Mercer's kindness." That night, Adrian called. "You heard, I heard." He chuckled softly. "You see, Calvin, Maggie's still teaching people, even when she's not here." I looked out the window. The river shimmered under a faint moon, its surface like old glass. "No," I whispered. "She's just helping the world find its rhythm again." A week later, a small envelope arrived. No return address. Inside, a single note written in violet ink. "The melody is complete." I recognized the handwriting, slanted, graceful. Maggie's. Not forged, not recent. A scrap of paper I must have tucked years ago between her sheet music, now dislodged as if time itself had decided it was ready to be found. I placed it on the desk and sat in silence for a long while. Then I put on her old record. The piano began low, steady, then faded into the gentlest silence. I smiled, then cried, then smiled again. Because justice, I realized, has its own soundtrack. And that night in Savannah, between the river and the wind, I swore I had finally heard the last note of the song called Maggie. Autumn came early to Savannah that year. Oak leaves blanketed the porch, glowing gold like fading embers. The air carried the scent of damp wood, and the distant chime of church bells, a familiar sound I thought had vanished with Maggie. I sat alone in the small house by the river and opened the old wooden box. Inside was everything left of a lifetime. An old cassette recording of Maggie's piano, the silver pen Adrian had forgotten after the press conference, and Evan's letter left behind before he left Savannah. "Dad, thank you for not teaching me how to take revenge but how to stand tall." I read it again and again until the words blurred through tears. Outside, the river mirrored a pale gray sky. I pressed play, and Maggie's piano filled the room. This time I heard it differently, no longer a melody of regret, but of completion. News of the Monroe case faded like rain after a long storm. Evelyn Monroe was sentenced to 3 years probation for concealing the death of Sylvia Grant. The sentence was short, but its shadow stretched long across the city. Claire left Savannah without a word. Months later, people said she was seen in Macon, Sylvia's hometown. She began teaching music at the small school where Sylvia's niece studied. Not out of obligation, but out of conscience, a form of redemption no one demanded. Evan, just as he'd said, opened a small recording studio in Raleigh. The kids called him Mr. Evan. Sometimes during practice, they talked about Mr. Mercer, the father, in that story that once made all of America speak about dignity. I never told them it was me. I didn't need to. Some stories are meant to be heard, not known. One early winter afternoon, Adrian Harlow came to visit. He looked frailer now, his hair whiter, his hands trembling slightly, but his eyes still carried the same brightness as the first day I met him on Bay Street. We sat on the porch watching the Savannah River drift like a mirror that no longer knew how to ripple. Justice, he said, is never clean. It always leaves a scar on the heart of whoever holds it. I smiled faintly. At least it means the heart still beats. Adrian nodded quiet for a long moment, then pulled an envelope from his coat. Read this. Printed neatly on the front opening ceremony, the Maggie Mercer Scholarship for students who find music in silence. I looked at him. You still haven't stopped, have you? He smiled gently. I'm only finishing what I owe to someone I admired too much to forget. The ceremony took place on the first cool day of fall. No cameras, no reporters, no noise. Just a small group of students playing Autumn Reverie, the first piece Maggie ever composed when she taught at the community center. Evan sat in the front row, calm face, steady eyes. When the piece ended, he stood and stepped to the microphone, his voice clear and unwavering. Some melodies take a lifetime to understand, and sometimes justice doesn't come from shouting. It comes from the courage to stay silent and stand your ground. He looked at me. I nodded. No words were needed. A single glance was enough. In his eyes, I saw Maggie and knew he had finally found his way back to himself. That night, I returned to the Riverside house. I turned on the light, opened the window, and let the Savannah breeze move through the curtains. On the table, the old candle still burned its flame, small, golden, silent, but steady. I whispered as if to someone standing beside me, you see, Maggie, everything's back in rhythm. Outside, the city still hummed horns, voices, the sound of water against stone. But inside me, there was only the music of silence, the final melody I once feared now turned into peace. I stepped onto the porch. Moonlight spilled across the river like a row of piano keys. I tapped lightly on the railing, 3 beats, then 4, and smiled, knowing that somewhere Maggie was still listening. If you've ever been dismissed, if you've ever known the weight of silence beneath someone's cruelty, remember, silence is not weakness. Sometimes it's the only way to make the world listen. Thank you for staying until the end. My name is Calvin Mercer, and this is the last song I've ever written, not with my hands, but with faith that dignity still has its sound. Tell me where you're listening from. And if you believe that justice has its own rhythm, share this so the melody keeps playing. Because sometimes silence is the most beautiful sound we have left.